God bless you, my brothers and sisters. We are continuing in our 40 Days of Decrease Lenten series. Today, our scripture is John chapter 18, verses 15 through 18. And I want to encourage you to read through those scriptures as we prepare to move through today's lesson and your time of prayer and reflection. It is impossible to be near Jesus and remain distant from discipleship. One can listen carefully, track events closely, quote scriptures accurately, and withhold the kind of presence that obedience requires. And in many areas of life, this posture is obvious: spectatorship without participation. But in faith, it often hides behind familiarity and knowledge. We convince ourselves that attention equals allegiance, but Lent presses us to examine that assumption. Today's fast confronts what the book calls Armchair Jesus, a way of relating to Christ that watches instead of follows, that analyzes instead of obeys, and that stays close enough to observe but far enough to avoid any cost. Armchair Jesus is the habit of engaging faith from a position of safety. It is loyalty without risk, conviction without action, and proximity without surrender. Spiritually, this looks like strong opinions without embodied obedience, admiration for Jesus' teaching without submission to his way, and theological clarity paired with lived distance. To fast from armchair Jesus is not to reject learning, reflection, or careful thinking. It is to refuse distance as a substitute for discipleship. This fast calls us out of observation and back into embodied following, placing ourselves where faithfulness is no longer theoretical. In John 18, verses 15 through 16, the A clause, John says, Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did another disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest, but Peter stood outside at the door. From the beginning of this scene, distance is emphasized. Peter follows, but he does not enter at first. He's close, but he's not yet committed. The setting shifts two verses later in verse 18, where Peter is warming himself around the enemy's fire. He's there with the servants and the officers huddled up, warming himself. And that detail matters because the fire is a place of comfort, not commitment. Peter chooses warmth over witness, proximity over participation. And within moments, this setting will frame Peter's denial. Following Jesus at a distance makes denial easier. Watching Jesus is not the same as walking with Jesus. Jesus calls followers, not spectators. And armchair faith keeps us informed but leaves us unchanged. Peter's distance is not rooted in hostility. He's not mad at Jesus. It's rooted in fear. Armchair discipleship is rarely rebellion, it's reluctance. It grows where disciples hedge their obedience to manage risk. Distance becomes a coping mechanism, near enough to stay connected, but far enough to stay safe. But distance also reshapes devotion. It weakens resolve. It trains the heart to compromise when pressure mounts. Lent exposes this pattern and asks whether our faith can withstand scrutiny because it's learned to stand close only when it's convenient. Distance from Jesus may preserve your comfort, but it also steadily weakens your courage. Armchair faith cannot sustain discipleship when consequences appear. Peter's body was near Jesus, but his allegiance wavered because his obedience lacked proximity. Jesus is not looking for spectators who monitor events from the fire's edge. He is forming disciples who will stand with him even when warmth disappears. Lent confronts religious distance. It draws us out of observation and back into presence. By fasting Armchair Jesus, we practice obedience, standing where faith costs honesty, accountability, and action. This fast invites us to close the gap between what we know and how we live, between watching and following. So today's fast asks one clear question: where am I following Jesus at a distance? Identify one place where engagement has been replaced by commentary or conviction without action, and take one step out of the armchair today. Show up where obedience is required. Align your presence with your professed faith, even if it feels uncomfortable. Hear your reflection questions as you get ready to read through the scriptures and pray today. Where am I observing rather than participating in discipleship? What risks have I avoided by keeping my distance? And what would stepping closer to Jesus look like right now? God bless you, my brothers and sisters. Again, I want to commend you to read through the scriptures for today, John chapter 18, verses 15 through 18, and then make sure that you take the time to pray. God bless you, and we will see you tomorrow.